This evening, the Jewish community welcomes in the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. And it gives me time to reflect a little bit, as this is my 30th year in Boston, and I've known the Silverston family for almost all 30. And so I'm really glad we can be in this sanctuary, even though it's set up for Rosh Hashanah, which is a little unusual. We're usually not in a space like this. But I'm glad we can gather here, for I believe it's most appropriate. For Rosh Hashanah is our collective day to consider our books of life, to reflect on our days upon this earth, and hopefully gain inspiration to fill them with joy and meaning and curiosity and love and family. And perhaps there's no better way than to begin this day, the day on which we're getting ready to welcome the masses, to celebrate Jay's life and the book he created. A life of love, work, family, culture, meaning. For 89 years, writing a book of life worthy of celebration. From Brooklyn to Lexington, with lots of love in between, which we'll be hearing about this morning. And so let us begin in words of prayer. You can find the words of Psalm 23 in the booklet you received as you entered the building today. I know Jay loved the piano, and it seems like Danny has fully embraced that love of his grandfather. And so I'm glad Danny will be accompanying the cantor this morning. Let's now read in English the words of the 23rd Psalm. God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for your name's sake. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, we read, L'kol zman ve'et l'chol chefetz tachat chashamayim, et laledet ve'et lamutz. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. This is our time to speak, and I know there are many stories to be shared within this room, and you'll have the opportunity during Shiva this afternoon and other moments when I know you'll gather. But I want to give Jay's children and grandchildren the opportunity to speak this morning. And so first, I would like to call upon Andrew to begin.
Thank you all for coming. Going to a funeral is about showing respect, and we just want you to know we really appreciate everybody who's here showing the respect. I don't know how many of you have been through a funeral, but the day before, you get together with the rabbi, and the rabbi helps you and tutors you of what you're going to say, what you should say, how long your speech should be. And the two things that were the takeaway from that was try to tell people something that they didn't know about Dad, tell them something that you learned, and keep your speech no longer than 2.5 pages double space. So you should be happy to know this is my speech. I will be the shortest, although my niece Isabel might be shorter. So what did I learn from my dad? I learned not to take no as an answer. And that became the cornerstone of how I live my life. And there's funny moments with that and not so funny moments with that. But I thought I'd share with you a couple stories of how that all came together for me. The first story that I want to share is, I don't know how many Patriots fans there are in the audience, but years ago we used to have season tickets, and that was in the Schaefer Stadium days. And back in those days, things just weren't as official. I mean, they had a turnstile, we sat on benches, although we had pretty good seats. And my dad, always trying to be cost effective, we had 2 seats, and so I was with him that day. But we used to take my youngest brother, Chuck, and Chuck was just, it wasn't big, but my mom would be, he's your problem, you guys got to take him. And we'd take him to the games, and my dad would have him on his shoulders, and we'd go to the turnstile, and he'd say, well, he's not going to sit in the seat, he's going to sit in my lap, and they'd let him in. And every time we'd go, we'd get in. One day, and Chuck's getting a little bigger now, and he's still kind of on his shoulder, and one day, the turnstile guy says, hey, you can't take that kid in, he's got to have a ticket. And my dad, without missing a beat, said, that's fine, then you take him. And he took Chuck, and he gave it to the ticket guy. And he said, come on. And, I'm bewildered. We were walking up the ramp. I said, Dad, they don't have a human lost and found. He said, it'll be fine. Don't worry. And we got, I don't know, it seemed to me it was 20, 30 yards up the rampway when the guy came running with Chuck and said, that's fine, you can take him. And well, we certainly knew at that point that we weren't going to take him anymore, but that was Dad. He had conviction, and he wasn't going to take no for an answer. He also was ferocious about trying to make us survive in the world and to teach us. And for me, he said to me, come on, you're coming with me to New York, because he had to go see his dad, and they were in Manhattan. And I said, great, I got a chance to spend some time with my dad. We got in the car, we drove to New York, and then when we got to southern Connecticut, he kind of got off the road and started taking, I said, Dad, don't we go, no, we're going a different way. I'm 16, I just got my learner's permit, and he says, guess what? You're driving now. And I said, what do you mean? He says, no, you're driving. And he pulled off. I don't know how many of you have been to New York but have ever driven on the Henry Hudson Parkway. I'm 16, I don't have my license. He says, you're gonna get on, you're gonna drive, and you're gonna get off. I remember, and to this day, how my knuckles were stuck. And I got on somehow. I managed to drive and got off. And we went to the city, and then we got into the city, and my Papa Julie's office was in Manhattan, and Dad said, wait here. Now, wait here, I was 16, I'm in the middle of the city, I'm on a main thoroughfare, I'll be back in 10 minutes. We didn't have phones in that day, you gotta remember, and he went away, and it's 10 minutes, it's 15 minutes, and now cars are honking at me, I'm like, what do I do? I had to move the car. I remember going around the block, and I don't have my license, going around the block. An hour later, my dad comes back. And I was pissed. I said, Dad, where were you? It's been an hour. He says, yeah, well, if I were you, I wouldn't have even stayed here for me. And that was his sense of humor. That was how he went. And I remember that story, and it's part of who we are. And the last thing I wanted to share with you today is I am at peace today. And I'm at peace today because I had the opportunity to spend time with him over the last years that he was mobile. Every Friday, I'd come, put him in the car, and we would go to lunch. And we went somewhere different all the time. And that was probably for the last 3 or 4 years that he could do that. And once he couldn't do that anymore, we didn't do it. But that was really meaningful time for me and with him. And, so as a good friend of mine reminded me the other day, I got no woulda, coulda, or shoulda. I'm completely at peace. Thank you.
Chuck second, or Neil? Chuck, if you'll come forward.
Good morning. It's nice to see everybody, even at this occasion. The title of my book will be, My Father Always Said the World is Full of Assholes. And while I know this might raise a few eyebrows, I think there's a funeral exemption to the rules of decorum in a synagogue. After all, he did have his own brand of humor, and he wasn't one to be edited or deterred. He had an incredible ability to just fix about any problem you had with duct tape or his go-to, can we speak to your supervisor? Questioning authority could have come from his favorite TV show, The Rockford Files. I think his version was to question the particular person's authority who was standing in front of him. No just wasn't in his vocabulary. He had a stroke when on a business trip in Chicago, and true to form, he knew he had it and continued giving his presentation, boarded the plane, and made it back to Boston. My early childhood memories, I must have blocked out the memory of him leaving me at the gate in Foxborough, included traveling with him on his various business trips, where I would spend long hours at the Art Institute of Chicago. Perhaps my love of travel and need to go on adventures came from those trips. One of his clients at the Art Institute noted on his passing, "I am very sorry to hear of your loss. Your father was a wonderful and great man who I enjoyed working with. I had so much respect for him. You should be proud of your father and his accomplishments. He did a wonderful job at the Art Institute and saved the Institute millions of dollars." I am both the youngest child and the only child. Clearly, I'm in the middle speaker, so you see I didn't get a prime slot, as Neil and Andrew were so much older than me. So our shared experiences of life at 14 Partridge Road were different. And in thinking about writing this, you start to remember different things, anecdotes, and memories, like the time I didn't go to the dump with him one Sunday when his VW Beetle blew up. He always made me stay in the car. Or the time I was driving my mother's car one night and it caught on fire at Alewife. I really thought this was the end of me, that he was going to be really pissed. Just the opposite. And in much to my surprise, he was very ecstatic, giddy, almost ecstatic. And I guess that was before the days of the electronic odometer. He was a good storyteller in those days, inventing various stories with different characters. As many of you know, Lauren, Lily, and I have a dog named Fred. Fred was my father's moniker for anyone whose name he did not know or chose not to know. It sort of became the family go-to. Ask Fred, "Where's Fred? Can you call Fred over when you see Fred?" My dad's professional accomplishments were plentiful. He was ahead of his time both in the use and utilization of technology, but in recognizing talent regardless of gender. He was a leader in the engineering industry, promoting women to senior positions in his firm because of their ability. He was a strong believer in that. In his later years, I think he enjoyed being referred to as Carol's husband, and then in his own humorous way as my younger brother. That's how he replied when in semi-retirement. He supported me by working at Paris Creperie. It was a win-win. Gave him something to do and kept him out of my mother's way while she was working. He fashioned himself as a bench coach, providing advice both welcome and unwelcome. He had his routine. He would work at Paris during the lunch rush, then pick up Lily from school, take her home, and spend the afternoon with her. The side note is that you might come home one day and find him in the bathroom unexpectedly. Growing up, grandparents became a cherished part of your life. I had an amazing Papa Izzy. And when Lily came into this world, one of my wishes for her was that she would have a papa like that. Perhaps I was setting the bar too high, but I did not. My father was the perfect grandfather, exceeding every expectation. They had an amazing relationship. He was her rock, cheerleader, and support system during any difficult time. I think he was at his happiest in life being a grandparent. It gave him purpose. I have enormous gratitude for the gift of relationship he gave her and she gave him. Lily asked him once if he was afraid of dying, and he said, "No, because you will live on through others. Then you live forever."
Neil.
I feel really sad now, and yet I'm filled with so much gratitude. Gratitude for all of you being here. Standing up in his community was so important to my dad, and he'd be really happy to know that you're here with